Okay, welcome to the ACI-LAC and Munich Airport International webinar called ORAT 2.0 Enhanced Methodology. In today's webinar, we have the pleasure to count with our speaker, Herbert Michael Keffel, Head of Competence Center Operations, ORAT and IT in Munich Airport International. Before we start, we would like to share with you that as usual, we have simultaneous interpretation. You could select Spanish or English in the Zoom menu, where is the globe icon. Besides, if you want to hear the original audio, if you don't want to hear the original audio, please click on mute original audio. As you can recall in other webinars, the chat function is disabled. And in case you want to ask any questions to the speaker, you will have to send it to the email that you find on the screen, info@aci-lac.io. The Q&A session will take place at the end of the presentation. So now I will give the floor to Herbert Michael Keffel, Head of Competence Center Operations, ORAT and IT at Munich Airport International. Michael,
yes,
you have the floor.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Carla, for the introduction. I'm somebody who made ORAT projects mainly through our entire career, and I really would like to share with you today the ORAT from a methodological point of view, as well as the latest developments that we have in ORAT projects that we deliver and how we deliver them. Next slide, please, Carla. So first, I would like to share with you why we run ORAT projects. It's basically a methodology that makes sure that an airport or any other infrastructure like terminals, cargo terminals, open in a safe and timely manner, that everybody is prepared, especially people and procedures, as well as we might want to minimize the risks of incidents during the opening of the infrastructure. Of course, avoid negative publicity and ensure that an opening is timely and successfully. Next slide. So what is this methodology? It's basically a step-by-step approach with different elements that are consecutive and that usually start with setting up a project, basically from the project management point of view, project governance, team, schedule for the project, etc. Then we have the so-called operational readiness preparation, where we prepare all stakeholders from a training, procedural, and staff point of view for the new operation that is in view, same as we start to familiarize and train people with the new infrastructure, but also mainly with the new procedures that we developed in the phase before. The next element would be, and this is for me still the most exciting and certainly also the most important element, trial operations, where we basically simulate the real deal. So this is simulating the real operation in the future infrastructure, where that is basically already completed and ready to operate. Then we usually have an operations transfer. It can be a move from A to B, but it also can be just a move into the new infrastructure or a combination of the two. Then we usually support the opening after the day one, where we help stakeholders to burn in their operation and to make sure that everything is stable, because we have, as ORAT project, including everybody who supported us, I would say that the best overview on how this operation should look like. And usually also we provide to our customers post-opening support, which is the next step after having a stabilized operation to further enhance and optimize the operation in terms of efficiency, quality, but sometimes even finance. As I said earlier, the benefits are a smooth and punctual startup from day one. the minimizing of risks of incidents, which not only cause bad publicity but also cost, the efficient use of your organization's resources as airport or terminal operator. We make sure that stakeholder staff, and stakeholder is a very wide term here. We talk about governmental agencies, we talk about our clients, the airlines, and also we talk about service providers, and sometimes even parties who are not directly linked to the airport operation, like public transportation providers, that they are trained and familiar with the new infrastructure and systems, if applicable. Then, of course, during this project, we basically do also general project management tasks, where we manage the stakeholders and try to balance our ORAT approach with their requirements of running a daily operation in the old terminal or old airport. This is pretty usual, and we want to facilitate the trade-off that is necessary to get them on board, although they run an operation at an old infrastructure. Of course, we do proper reporting into all directions, mainly to the client, but also internally and also to the stakeholders. And another benefit that is really relevant is the fact that we update and optimize procedures in alignment with the new infrastructure, because often, and this is something that is very typical for all sort of ORA projects, we have a huge leap, a huge jump from the technological level of the old to the new infrastructure. Next slide, please. So from these phases that I just mentioned, of course, as I said, they are consecutive. And we usually start with an ORA project. This can vary depending on the size and complexity of the infrastructure that we talk about. About 36 months before the opening, we start to set up the project. Usually this takes 3 to 4 months, and this compromises stakeholder engagement, risk register, so to identify the project risks together with the client and sometimes even the construction company. This comes with, of course, preparing a schedule, which is a pretty complex task because the phases that you see below heavily depend on construction progress and system and commissioning progress. Once this is done, we start the phase of operational readiness preparation. I will come back to this later in the course of my presentation, where we basically make sure that every stakeholder and every core process, for instance, baggage handling or passenger handling, is ready for the new infrastructure, so that all stakeholders are on the same page when it comes to operating your new infrastructure. So the next phase, where we slowly dive into practice and into the new terminal, will be familiarization and training. Several aspects come here into play. I will go into detail in the course of the presentation. Then we have trial operations start usually, but it heavily depends. I had projects where we started trials way before, like 9 or 10 months before. 6 months, that's I would say a good average, where we start with single processes, for instance, passenger check-in or baggage check-in, in a phase where we engage the stakeholders, but not the public yet, because the public will serve as trial passengers in the next phase that usually takes 3 months into the opening, where we combine these single processes like passenger departure with arrival, as well as trials on the apron with aircraft, sometimes even live aircraft or simulated aircraft, and baggage handling. So in this phase that is the next advanced trials, we basically simulate the real-time process chains of the airport operation. So basically then we simulate really the real deal. Usually you have a very important phase during the advanced trials, which makes it pretty complicated and challenging. We have the so-called security sweep. This is the phase where the usually landside dedication of the terminal will be brought into reality, which is having an active security line through the building or even through the airport, where you have now then an active airside and a landside and the boundaries in between. This requires that you sweep the airside and then activate the security line, including all cameras, all access readers, all checkpoints. This takes, depending on the size of the infrastructure and the depth of the check, between several days and 2-3 weeks. And this is a phase that is pretty significant and makes trials more realistic in the end, because you have the active security line in the building, but also more challenging in terms of logistics. Talking about logistics, the next and more or less final phase before the opening is the operations transfer. As I said, this can be a big move over the highway, like 30-40 kilometers. The last time I did this was in Istanbul, where we moved the operation from the city airport Ataturk to the new airport, 40 kilometers. And we transferred roughly 3,500 trucks, so big deal. On the other hand, it can be pretty easy, like my very last project in Newark, where I commissioned the new Terminal A, was where we basically have a transfer that is not even 400 yards, and everything can be transferred over the apron. Sometimes also you have big elements of move-in, so where new deliveries, for instance, office furniture or equipment will be delivered. And we also want to make sure here that we phase it in a way that the not so critical elements can be brought into the building up front, and only time critical or very high value assets like GSE come last minute. And as I said earlier, after the opening, we provide opening and post-opening support to stabilize and further develop the operation of the airport or terminal. Next slide, please. Let's go into more detail. So one of the phases that I want to mention here, it's something that is pretty optional, but we recommend it more and more, and this is why it's here with the ORAT 2.0. We recommend to the clients, long before the ORAT, as I just described it, starts, to do a design review. And ideally, this starts during the design phase of the project, so not 36 months into the opening, but rather 5 years into the opening. A phase where we, together with the client, create a very high-level operational concept based on the terminal operators and owners and stakeholder input, in order then to review the planning parameters and prerequisites, KPIs, etc., in order to assess if what is on the drawings, what is presently planned, really fits the requirements that the future operation demands. We will assess plans and designs against these operational requirements and suggest and decide on design modifications. Because the earlier do this, the cheaper or without any cost it will come. There are very expensive mistakes that come up sometimes during trials when it's way too late and when the construction is already finalized, that require a lot of work, a lot of investment and time to fix. And what you don't have, as I said, trials start usually 6 months before the opening. Here is time and also money. This is why we suggest to do this very early. It's a phase that is easy to manage and then comes with a design freeze. This means that if a proper design review is executed, you have a design freeze already, I would say, 3 months before the 3 years before the opening, ideally before even the ground is broken at the construction site. Yeah, because you had this alignment with all stakeholders, everybody had its possibility, its chance to raise their voice, and also you as expert have given your 5 cents into the planning, and we have a firm concept and a firm reflection in the design. Next slide, please. So the design review, as I said, we create this, this high-level definition of operation concept and design criteria. We retrieve with the stakeholders the operational requirements at the start phase of the terminal design and bring all this in the design phase of the terminal. Next slide. We involve operational experts from the consultant side to do this design review and prove the process quality, especially when it comes to KPIs and service level aspirations from the side of the future airport or terminal operator. As I said earlier, we want to freeze the design. This is really crucial for the on-time and on-time budget delivery. You might know that one of the biggest problems of construction project of any kind, but the more complex, the higher the problem is time and budget runaway. You can pretty much control this by a very early design freeze. Yeah, but this requires that you have a high level definition of how you want to operate this terminal, and also the reflection in the design, and freeze it then very early. Okay, next slide, please. This is something that I bring you from Newark Airport. So this is a rainy day after the opening. What you see here is a smoking area that is outside of the building at the passenger departure level on the curbside. And you see a sign that points to the smoking area, which is in the middle of nowhere on the curb. You see this little column, this little dark column, that's the ashtray. And you see the smokers on the second page next to a curbside check-in counter under the little roof. And what are they doing there? They are smoking, and they are polluting the entire area, the entire floor with their cigarette butts that even burns the plastic coating of the concrete. So you see that somebody really didn't make up his mind and simply put the smoking area at the east coast of the United States, where it rains pretty often, and it's getting windy and cold or really hot, just in the middle of nothing without any roof. This is something that could be easily prevented by design reviews of somebody who knows this problem, who has experience, and can tell this will not work. Just a little example. There are more significant examples, of course, when it comes to operation. But this is what I just want to mention here. Next slide, please. The operational readiness preparation. This is after the setting up of the project, and of course having a design review up front, the first technical part of the ORAT project. What you do here is, as I said, create a high-level concept. You look at documented procedures that are already there. You would assess construction site and systems that are intended. You analyze the stakeholders in general, and also their needs, requirements, and their interfaces. So what are, and depends, it really depends on the area where you work, and also on the framework, sometimes on the regulatory and legal framework, how the interfaces are between authorities and stakeholders, or between authorities and airlines. What we would then do is organize all stakeholders in so-called core process groups. The core processes are basically the main functional elements of an airport, like baggage handling, like passenger handling, like airside, like public transportation. And then you would unify in these core process groups everybody who is relevant as stakeholder in this very process. Let's take an example. The core process group baggage handling would potentially consist of airlines, ground handlers, the airport operator, eventually the baggage handling system operator. If it deviates from the aforementioned, you will certainly have customs, sometimes even police authorities. And then you would guide them through a process where we identify the right mode to operate the baggage handling process, not only the system, but also the entire logistical process between passenger and aircraft and vice versa. And also, of course, consider all regulatory requirements in order to have a practical, smooth, and up to quality concept for the operation of this core process. And this you would do with every core process. And this will be usually hosted by members of the ORAT team who have specific operational background in their field. What comes out is an updated standard operating procedure set, as well as a concept of operations for the airport. Next slide, please. As I said, we will prepare all these documents. We will align these concepts between core processes as well. And something that is equally important, that we will develop fallback procedures and business continuity concepts as essential, including all the legal requirements and regulatory requirements that come with the business environment. Next slide, please. As I said, we will jointly elaborate the stakeholders' concepts of operations, and this is essential in person. This is one of the very, very intense lessons that we learned. We did this ORAT project in Newark, in New York, partly under COVID conditions, and I can tell you that it was not very helpful to do all this online. Being together in one room eases communication and understanding of each other, and this is one of the lessons that I don't want to miss. Do this in person if necessary and if possible. Another thing that is very important, every entity, let's talk about every airline or every ground handler or authorities, have an ORAT manager. This is somebody who comes out of this entity and is responsible for all ORAT activities and matters of this organization towards the ORAT project. Keep them closely linked to the project development and ORAT process. Means get regular meetings with them, update meetings, single sessions and group sessions with the ORAT managers in order to keep them up to date and keep them also motivated to work with you, because they are essential. They are more or less your speaker into the stakeholders organization. What happens, of course, as ORAT projects are something that is pretty long. As I said, we can talk about 36 months. You will have fluctuation of key staff, not only in the stakeholders organization, but sometimes also in the client's organization. And this is why be ready to prepare specific handover briefings and even trainings for people who join the project to replace others who left the company or the organization, so that they can gain quick access to the project itself, and that also you gain back access to the entity of the stakeholder and the corresponding ORAT manager. Next slide, please. So one of the very important phases where we slowly start to go into practice after we defined the target operational models in the various core processes, as I just mentioned, and you have like an agreement on how this terminal will be operated with every stakeholder, including their buy-in, is that you want to start familiarizing and training staff. So what an ORAT project usually delivers here is a familiarization concept. This is a concept I will go into detail later, that familiarizes every little individual and stakeholder organization with the new terminal, including a familiarization plan, document kit, and schedule. You want to execute trainings to train the familiarization trainers. You want to coordinate, and this is also equally important, O&M trainings, as well as coordinate the familiarization when it's ongoing. Next slide, please. For the familiarization training, what is it? You want to make sure that everyone who will work in the terminal has seen the terminal before it opens, that he knows his ways, that he knows the staff routes, that he knows where the main infrastructure and equipment elements are in the building. This is why you want to determine very early, and usually you do this in the first month of the project during the project setup phase, the projected participant numbers to size these trainings programs. So, give you an example. You open a terminal in Bogota, and you want to talk to customs in order to gain a feeling for how many people of customs will work there. Not at a time, but in total. So, how many people of customs will rotate through this terminal approximately. And this you do with every stakeholder until you know that you have, just to make something up, 3,500 people that have to be familiarized because they will be working, potentially working in the new terminal. Then you want to, then you have like an idea on how many people will be working there, and then you can start sizing the duration of this project phase. So how long will the familiarization training phase be? So if I have like 3,500 people, I can tell that this can easily take 3 months or 4 months to push them all through a FAM training. And also, it's important that only FAM trained staff goes into the trials that will be the next phase of the project. You need to make sure that we have, and this is the other aspect of the training, that you have a proper coordination between the training providers of O&M training, so operations and maintenance training, between the providers, so the system vendors, and the training recipients. I give you an example. You have new passenger boarding bridges, of course, in your terminal. Eventually, you haven't had passenger boarding bridges at all, which means that you don't have any experience on operating these infrastructure, or you had another type. Either way, you have to provide a training. And for this, you have to, as an ORAT project, you have to make sure that there's a proper coordination between the time where you need the training recipients, so the ground handler or the passenger service handling agency or company, and the system provider. So you want to really balance the approach, the timely approach of, for instance, ThyssenKrupp, who provides the passenger boarding bridges, with the ground handlers. So to make sure that first, the passenger boarding bridges are available, that they are tested and commissioned, so that you can do training. Secondly, that you have enough lead time for the training so that you have trained staff in your trials who can operate this. As we are not talking about passenger boarding bridges, but about a huge variation in number of systems in a medium-sized terminal with medium complexity and up-to-date infrastructure, this can easily be 40 to 50 O&M trainings that have to be delivered to ground handlers, airlines, airport operators, but also to the future maintenance bodies of all this. Yeah, like third-party providers can be the airport operator with his engineering department because they have to know how to maintain and repair this equipment. And usually the system vendors, for instance, passenger boarding bridge provider, offers all these trainings. So this you want to make sure. Secondly, as I said earlier, precise definition of timelines and dependencies and responsibilities for the system training and for the system and building handover and testing and commissioning and start of operations, so that you have enough time to do these trainings and have enough time to do trials with trained staff. And you want, and this is a must, make sure that the building is handed over before the FAM training and trials. Because during FAM training, and this is something that I didn't say so far, you familiarize people in the building. It means that you give them a classroom training, and I will give you some more details and also the newest development later. In a classroom training to explain the geography of the terminal and the functions, and then you take them by the hand in groups of between depends on the size of the terminal and number of stakeholders that you have to train, 20 and 30 at a time, and walk them through the construction site. That has to be, in the best case, PPE free, so you don't need protective equipment, and can walk safely through the entire building and show them the infrastructure as per their user requirements. It can be that you have tours that go through the entire building, including the airside, for instance, for customs or the police bodies. Also, you might want to have trainings only for the airside and the ramp level, for instance, for ground handlers below the wing services. And also, you might have people who are only above the wing and only see the terminal from the concourse level. Yeah, for instance, the security service provider for the passenger screening, or the above the wing service staff from ground handlers. Next slide, please. In order to do this, because I just made something up, we have 3,500 people. You want to consider the train the trainer methodology, so that you roll out the training in a train the trainer fashion with all stakeholders. And also, can you tell you from my own experience that some stakeholders, especially authorities, want to do it with train the trainer, because they can then shape and size it as per their requirements and also staff availability. And as I said, it can be customer border protection services. It can be the transport security agencies, can be the police, it can be the fire department that you want to train. What we also do usually, because sometimes this training starts pretty early, and we have two effects. First, for some stakeholders, this training has been too long ago on the day of operation, on the first day of operation. And of course, you have also people who are no-shows, who for operational reason cannot attend the training. This is why we offer last-minute refresher trainings, like 2-3 weeks into the opening. Of course, this is a huge effort, because at the same time you operate advanced trials, the next phase that I will come to. But also what we do is also offer open terminal days. Basically, at this time, which is usually 1 or 2 weeks into the opening, the terminal is open. We have the FAM trainers, so the super users, so to say, available, and we receive people in the terminal who just have questions, who just want to reassure themselves that they have understood everything, that they know where the staff entrance is, that they know how to operate the baggage belt on the check-in desk, etc. So this is just to give like the last bit of confidence to people who might not have been in the terminal for long enough, or have had just a week trial participation. And we do this, as I said, very close to the opening date. And also we have, of course, because we are in real life, I mean, what I just explained is of course gray theory. In reality, you will face stakeholders who have, because they usually run a live operation on the site, besides your construction and ORAT project, who simply cannot attend trials and FAM training as required. Because my theoretical and by the book ambition is that everyone who will work into the terminal will at least be in one FAM training, of course, and this is usually enough, but participate in at least 2 trials in order to create this confidence that I will talk about later. Sometimes this is simply not possible, because the ground handlers or airlines cannot afford to send the staff over besides their operation. Also depends on when you do the trials, and they also depend on the opening date. And nobody will shape and size the opening date in a way that it considers holidays, summer seasons, where you have a very high utilization of staff and a very high traffic peak. This is why you want to make sure that on the opening day, you have enough people ready to support the operation, and also stakeholder staff who have just a weaker knowledge of everything, because they had not that commitment in the program, in the process as others. and just to stand by and help them. Yeah, this is expensive, but you have to consider this because it's even more expensive if you have a meltdown on day one. Next slide, please. We usually, and this is one of the V2 approaches that we have, support this part of the project with an IT tool, with a cloud-based IT tool, where we measure the level of training that we had. We measure the stakeholders' participation and the share of stakeholders of what entity have attended the meeting, the trials, and the FAM training. You see overviews on the degree of participation in total by stakeholder and the participants in total. So this is, by the way, from our Newark ORAT project that we did. As you see, we had attendance of 2,500 people in the FAM training at this time, which equaled 78%. And you also can see on the right-hand box the entities and the amount of people who attended the trials. This is a tool that tracks and traces attendance, but not only this, it also creates report, is a platform that is good for registering for all these trainings and later also trials, where you just get a login and you can book your session, which makes planning easy, and everything is online and it creates automatic reports. Just beautiful. Next slide, please. Simulating the real deals. This is what trials are. We will basically simulate the real operation with real staff in the new environment before the opening day. So what do we need? What are the key actions? We want to develop a trial concept and also a trial logistics plan. Logistics plan because we need, for instance, supporting staff that carries bags and simulates ground handlers. We need bags. In a typical ORAT project of a medium-sized terminal, we have at least 3,500 to 4,000 trial bags of all shapes and sizes and weights in order to simulate this load for the baggage handling system. We create trial scenarios like movie scripts and a trial schedule. We coordinate and manage the participating stakeholders. We coordinate and execute the trials. We evaluate the trials because trials have to be evaluated. We want to create lessons learned. We create open issue lists and their results in order to follow up on open issues. This is certainly the most complex and also labor-intensive phase of a project, but I can tell you that it's worth. So depending on the shape and size and complexity of the terminal, whether it's a national, a domestic, or an international terminal, whether it is a terminal that is dedicated to one airline only, or if it has a multitude of airlines like a common use terminal, these trials can be anything between 15 and up to 40 different trials that we execute in exactly the separation that I explained, which is basic trials, so single processes, and advanced trials or integrated trials where you combine the single processes, like in a movie, and you have all action in parallel, including things like emergency trials or fallback trials. So you want to have like a day where you simulate terminal operations with departing passengers, and on the side, without anybody knowing, throw a smoke bomb. We had this in projects in order to see if staff can evacuate the terminal and if everybody is aware of the emergency routes and how to operate the doors, etc. Next slide, please. These are some impressions of an ORAT project in the United States of trials. You see bags lined up. You see people standing there still with PPE because the building was not fully ready. You see that we operate check-in desks, we operate gates and the baggage handling system. These are just some impressions of trials, which usually, as I said, start 6 months before the opening, and you have 3 months of basic and 3 months of advanced trials. Next slide, please. So as I said earlier, we have FAM training and trials, and the FAM training should start a little bit earlier, so it's parallel but a little bit displaced, in order to make sure that when you start your trials, you have the first people available who have their FAM training, because being FAM trained is necessary to move in the building and to operate trials. Yeah. As I said, we plan for basic and advanced trials with integrated scenarios and increasing complexity. For advanced trials, all trial requirements must be available, which means that construction must be completed and everything is tested and commissioned and ready for use. I'm not talking about beautifying the terminal. I'm not talking about necessary punch list items, the paint on the wall and art that is hanging in the terminal, but I talk about all functional elements must be there. What you want to do is you want to set up, from the ORAT point of view, a trial requirement plan, which basically makes sure that all requirements that you have during these 6 months of trials are available upfront to construction, so that construction can make sure that the requirements that you have are available on your trial day. So it's basically an alignment of your trial schedule along with your requirements and construction. Of course, testing and commissioning must be done and successfully done before trial starts, because we don't want to test. Trials are not a test. It's not a technical test. Basically, trials are there to simulate the procedures with staff. So we want to make sure if procedures are working, and we want to make sure that staff is properly trained. As I said, ORAT is mainly people and procedure readiness, not construction readiness. Next slide, please. Of course, you have to have a logistics plan in place, because you will move hundreds of staff through the building, so stakeholder staff. And once you do integrated trials, you want to run at least 5, 6 trials with trial passengers. And this is usually the public that you acquire and lure into your building with things like be the first to operate or to get a sneak peek of the terminal. And usually we have very good resonance when we call the public to attend trials as trial passengers. In this regard, trial passengers will usually get a new identity once they report to trials. They get a fake passport, basically something out of paper, and a boarding pass, and then and a bag, of course, or 2 bags or 3, depending on the scenario, and then would just check in along and run through the building with the usual milestones and stations like a real passenger. And we want to see that passengers find their way, that they find their check-in desk, that they understand how to check in, that they find every piece of infrastructure from the restrooms to the security check-in, and that they even board an airplane. Sometimes it's a fictional airplane, sometimes it's a real airplane, depending on your scenario and the willingness of airlines to provide airplanes. Usually you can combine this very well, because a lot of airlines want to execute so-called gate fit tests, where airlines want to test if all aircraft that they operate in this terminal are fitting on the ramp stands, that all infrastructure is working and available and within reach. And this is usually the opportunity where you combine your integrated trial passenger trials with aircraft trials. Of course, these trials have to be really well prepared, because you have a lot of material, a lot of services. Sometimes you need people to run bags through your building. So once you check them in, you have to bring them out again. You have to bring them to the check-in level again, because the passenger might not retrieve the bags. You need to run catering for sometimes more more than 1,000 people in the building, including stakeholder staff and people working there during trials, as well as passengers. You want to prepare the trials properly, which is having a trial scenario, having briefings for passengers as well as for the trial participants from the stakeholders. And most importantly, you want to debrief the trials in order to make sure that you learn your lessons and you can pass on open issues to construction, to airlines, when it comes to ironing out training deficiencies or punch list items in construction. Yeah, and this is really crucial that you really follow up. And this is also one of the reasons why usually you want to run only 2 trials per week, for 2 reasons. The first reason, of course, that the logistical effort to plan and execute this is really immense. And the second reason is that after a trial, after debriefing, you want to pass on the open issues with the expectation that the open issues will be solved on the next trial, which is just 2 days later. Next slide, please. Here you see an overview of a live project where you see the trial requirements and their incline, which is the blue line, over the course of trials. And you see that we start out like with something like 150 trial requirements when you start the trials, and an incline to up to 600 items that you need when the advanced trials start. And you see that once the advanced trials are there, you don't have any incline anymore, because as I said earlier, when the advanced trials are there, the terminal must be ready. Yeah. And here you see also that nothing works by the books, because the green line shows in this actual project how the availability really developed against the requirement, against the plan. And also you see, which is very interesting, that sometimes the availability even drops with time. And this can happen if you have infrastructure that has to be reworked, or if testing and commissioning was not successful and infrastructure has to be taken out of service again. And these are the things that you have to manage and cope and have to like reflect in your trial plan. That has to be flexible on the one hand, but also pretty solid in order to make trials foreseeable for the stakeholders. Because as I said, we have sometimes up to 1,000 participants, including stakeholder staff and public that is invited as trial passengers. So you don't want to have too much moving parts, but you see, you still have to stay flexible. And this is why it's so important to really run behind these open issues in order to iron out open issues that were determined during the project, but also you want to make sure that your trial requirements are fulfilled. And this requires a very close alignment with construction. So I can only opt and urge you in such a situation to have a good and solid working relationship with construction, in order to have them updating the schedules and the requirement lists accordingly, so that you have a good transparency and overview on where construction is against your requirements. Next slide, please. Here you see, I just talked about this cloud-based supporting tool. This is a registration page of our trials in EWR in Newark. And here you can register online with a link that is sent out either to trial participants, which for me are stakeholder staff, but also for trial passenger. And this is a screen of the trial passenger registration, where you register for a specific trial, where you then are registered with your name, and everything can be prepared for you once you then really come to the trial, where we will register you again with a barcode, and then you are simply getting all your documents, you get a badge, etc., so you can participate in the trials. So this makes it pretty easy, and you see that in this case we had 940 passengers in a trial, which is, I can tell this, a real challenge to manage. Yeah, and there are certain And there's even certain thresholds where more passengers don't really add more realism. It just causes more, I want to say, more effort for you to manage, but the but the but the benefits are not really there. Yeah, so the burden is stronger than benefits. In this case, usually we save like 800-900 trial passengers if we properly manage them and if we properly circulate them through your trials is way enough. Next slide, please. So now we are slowly getting close to opening our airport. The operations transfer is something that has to be planned very accurate. First thing that you do, and you do this very early, usually a year or even longer before the opening, you want to develop a cutover concept, which means how do I open the airport? So I have this terminal ready by this and then, and how do I open it? There are many different ways. There is the so-called Big Bang, where you open overnight, which means that all of a sudden the 14 million passengers and I don't know, 30 planes at a time are not in the old terminal but in the new one. You might want to consider a phased opening or a soft opening where you start slow. Everything has its advantage and risks and disadvantages. So the risks for the Big Bang is, of course, that if something fails, you have a problem and you have to turn back an entire terminal or airport operation. Something that never happened to that extent, at least not to my knowledge and experience. The good thing about this, and this is why it's usually preferred by stakeholders who don't really deal with the risk in the first place, is that stakeholder staff isn't double utilized because they work at the old terminal until, I don't know, 12 o'clock at night, and the morning shift simply works at the new terminal. And what happens in between is up to the ORAT project, which is moving the time critical parts and firing up the operation. But of course, this is a certain risk. On the other hand, a soft opening is something that has not that much of a risk, but has the big disadvantage that you have two operations that work somehow parallel, at least for the soft opening period, which can be from a week to several months. This is certainly without any risks, or without big risks, let me put it like this, but you have a high utilization of stakeholder staff that most of the stakeholders cannot afford. This is why I personally prefer the Big Bang, although higher risks, if properly managed, can be controlled. Yeah. So that's the cutover concept. Once you have this concept, so you have a Big Bang or not, and if you don't, you might want to phase the airlines or routes, etc., accordingly during the soft opening run up. You want to develop a logistics plan on how to move over all the all the goods and equipment. You want to coordinate building protection measures. So, for instance, in elevators, etc., that are used, that they are properly protected. Of course, you support the stakeholders in preparation and preparing their transfer activities. And also you want to coordinate the relocation, which is basically a one-night job where you want to make sure that everything runs as planned in the logistics plan. These are the key actions here. There's not too much to talk about, but this is usually what is the most exciting thing. And I can tell you that I did many openings in my career. Most of them were big bangs, but I also had soft openings. The big bangs are something that is pretty exciting and certainly the most challenging part of such an ORAT project. But as I said, if you have a proper operational readiness preparation, if people are trained and trialed and have enough confidence to work in this, the the transfer is the easiest part, to be honest. And also you have a good feeling because you know that the project was under control and you have done what is the main cause of this project. You have achieved operational readiness. Next slide. Here you see an extract of a logistics plan, mainly a schedule with some time windows where you allocate slots, moving slots in zones. For instance, move in zones, let me say a certain part of the curbside of a terminal and a time to a stakeholder. Let's say that airline XYZ wants to move in with their staff at 3 o'clock on the 28th of September. You give them the slot. Another airline that wants to move at the same time has to move time-wise and go differently. And you want to prepare this logistical plan up front. And this tool helps you also with that, so that everybody knows when he has to go from where to where. Yeah. So this tool creates a logistical plan that is then distributed and followed up in coordination with all stakeholders in order to make the move a success. Next slide, please. So, as I said, the opening support, what do? You have the first day of operation. What you basically do is supporting all stakeholders, especially the ones, as I said earlier, who haven't had that strong preparation during the familiarization and trial operations phase of the project. You stand by and help them with their staff. Of course, on top of that, you systematically monitor and evaluate and assess the daily operations from the first day on. Still, you record, track, and follow up on open issues that come up, because some issues you might not be able to capture even during trials. Hopefully, these are only minor issues, and this is what it usually is. But still, you find things that have to be repaired, things that have to be replaced, that disappeared, etc., etc. And this you want to track and trace and follow up with system providers, the construction company that is probably still working on punch list items, etc. So another thing, as I said earlier, you shadow manage key operational staff in order to give them confidence. So I had opening support parts of ORAT projects where we had up to 20 people in the terminal in different areas, like check-in, like the hold rooms with the gates, and even on the ramp, in order to assist stakeholder staff in their daily duties, answer questions, hand out instructions or job cards in order to support them and catch people who haven't, as I said, haven't been in trials or rarely been in trials or haven't received the right trainings that are offered, like familiarization. And of course, like in every good project, you prepare a final report for the client. Next slide, please. As I said, the opening support can partly make up for compromised trials by hands-on supporting a stakeholder staff with infrastructure and procedural deficits. It has a strong emphasis on stakeholders with weak FAM numbers and low trial participation, as I explained earlier. We had the experience that some stakeholders might not be able to staff according to the requirements. These need a really strong opening support, because usually a lot of entities do this only once in their career or in the life cycle of this terminal of an airport, and of course they don't know the exact paramount and extent of issues and deficits. But as an experienced ORAT provider, this is why first you want to try to build a strong relationship on the high level, and secondly, you want to motivate them to have their trainers available on day one in order to support staff in the sense of super users. As I said earlier, the opening support must be flexible and versatile to support different areas of operation, to reinforce whatever comes up. Can be queuing, can be cleaning quality. This is what we had in projects. Can be security services that don't work as required. because you have to see that a lot of entities, depending on the scenario, build up huge organizations that haven't been there yet, because terminal operators and airport operators have a tendency to optimize their service provider portfolio by appointing new service providers. And these basically need to be double familiarized because they haven't worked in a terminal environment ever, for instance, security services, and especially not in this one. Same for concessions. Depending on the project, you have a lot of small concessions. This is something that is pretty notorious in in Europe and the United States, that you promote and motivate small businesses to come into a terminal and open shops and food and beverage outlets. But these small businesses are not used to operate in a terminal environment. They need a lot of support in dealing with authorities. They need support logistical, how to organize trash removal, how to organize their goods logistics. And they want to, they might ask for support. And this is why the opening support, as I said, has to be flexible and versatile. We even did food inspections at a project in concessions from the ORAT project out, because we were simply there and could do it. Next slide, please. Post-opening support, as I said, we stay on the ground after the operation is stabilized and optimize the operation along with the stakeholders and the terminal operator. Sometimes even we acted as interim managers for certain fields of operation. As I said earlier, we review the operation, provide monthly reports, and improve, recommend, and sometimes even execute and plan for improvement measures. Yeah. Next slide, please. Coming back to the opening. So a well-timed decision on the opening methodology, as I said, big bang versus phased is essential, but you also need to stay flexible because things might go wrong. So have a flexible approach available. Yeah. What is important, and this is one of the lessons learned, is to wisely choose the date or the publication of the opening date. And there are two things here. The public publication, so the announcement to the public, and the internal announcement to the key stakeholders. Yeah, it's important in order to have a date in place that everybody can work towards, because with a date in public, of course, you create a lot of social pressure on everybody involved in the project, mainly on construction. Yeah. What we had during COVID, and this is something that, as I said, really gave us a hard time. We have a high rotation of stakeholder management staff because a lot of airlines laid off staff. Yeah, and there was some tasks that couldn't properly be executed because simply the staff was not there. So this was a huge challenge in the development of the target operating models, concepts, and procedures. Yeah. And we also, as I said earlier, made the experience that remote work is nice, but it cannot really replace in-person interaction. Yeah. As I said, we had a lot of layoffs of employees in 2020 and 2021, and this made ORAT projects pretty difficult because people had to be phased into the project, and not only from the management point of view, like ORAT managers, but also stakeholder staff during the entire life cycle of the ORAT project. So we had big chunks of staff coming into this project or coming into the operation, the future operation, just 4 weeks into the opening. And then you have a challenge in training, FAM training, and trialing these new staff into your new terminal. Next slide, please. What is yet to come? So what we experience now in Munich, because in my home airport in Munich, we also have an ORAT project in a terminal extension, and you see this in these pictures, is that we want, and we do this partly already in this project, it's a little bit of a principle. And you see this on the top left picture, a person with a mounted camera on top of its head that is moving through the building. And basically, this person is creating a laser and 3D created picture of the terminal that includes, and you do this during different stages of the project, 3D pictures of construction in different layers. So the picture below shows water pipes, and we can even determine in this model if it's for hot water, cold water, if it's clean water or dirty water. This brings familiarization to a new level, because you might create 3D pictures that people don't have to walk anymore, but they can do a virtual familiarization. The picture on the left, sorry, on the right, shows how a camera sees your terminal, and depending on and you see these different colors, they depend on the distance from the camera to the reflecting object, and this creates an undistorted, a very accurate model of your terminal that can be used for AI-driven and virtual reality created FEM trainings. So this is what we are presently working on and hope to introduce in one of the next Aura projects that we have. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for your attention. I hope that I could give you a good insight into how an Aura project these days is executed. I would be happy to answer your questions that probably now come via email, right, Carla?
Yes, Herbert. Since we run out of time, we will receive your questions via email through info@aci-lac.io,
Mm-hmm.
and we will follow up with Herbert the answers and let you know all the answers.
Exactly. This
Um,
is what we do.
yeah, thank you, Herbert, for sharing us this valuable information today, and thank you
Thank
all
you
the
very much.
participants for being here. Have a great day and see you in the next webinar.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.